All right, hi everyone, and welcome back to week 5 of Intro to iOS. Last week we covered UI table views, and today we'll be touching base on UI collection views, which are pretty similar. So first up is just some review. What are table views made up of? Okay, so the answer is C, sections that contain rows or cells. Remember that one of the functions you have to define when using a UI table view is the cell for row at function, which depicts how the cells of a section in the table view should look like. And now for a second question, which table view methods are optional to implement? Remember that some methods are required and some are optional, and for this you can choose as many options as you think are appropriate. So the answer is actually B and D. For B did select row at. Not all table views need to have an action for cell selection. And for D, height for row at, table views will have a cell height calculated based on the cell's content if it's not overridden. This is because it has a row height property that's set to automatic dimension by default. All right, and now for today's lecture on UI collection views. So UI collection views display cells in a grid. They're pretty similar to UI table views, and you could basically implement a table view with a UI collection view, but they do have their differences. And so this is a visual example. This is the photos album, which uses a UI collection view. And so if you're thinking in terms of table views, each row or cell would have 3 images. But in this case, with a collection view, each cell has 1 image, and those cells can be aligned horizontally as well as vertically. And so instead of specifying rows, we're actually going to specify items. All right, so another example is with Spotify and Netflix. Here you'll notice that we can scroll horizontally as well as vertically, and that's all collection views, which help to provide more flexibility than table views. And so collection views also have a data source similar to table views. It's called UICollectionViewDataSource, and similar to table views again, you have to specify a number of items in section and cell for item at methods. So instead of rows for table views, we have items for collection views. And so these methods are really similar to table views. In fact, they juxtapose each other. The first specifies how many items we want to render, and the second specifies what view we're rendering for the item. And so essentially, like I said before, an item for a collection view is just synonymous with a row for a table view. And so some key differences between table views and collection views. Collection views can scroll both vertically and horizontally, whereas table views can only scroll vertically. And similarly, both the width and height can be specified for a collection view, or collection view cells, but table views only give you control of their height of their cells. So yeah, from these key differences, you'll see that a table view can be made with a UI collection view, but a collection view can't be made with a table view. All right, so something you'll also have to specify for collection views is a UI collection view flow layout. And this flow layout tells a collection view how its items should be rendered. So this includes its scroll direction, spacing between items horizontally, item size, and spacing between items vertically. All right, demo time. Okay, so for today's demo, we'll be making a simple collection view with color swatches. And so notice here that the cells are grouped into sections with headers. And so when you click on one, labels will actually appear with the colors hex code, and you can click again for them to disappear. So yeah, that's what we'll be making. And so first up, let's just go over what the starter code has. In our app delegate, we have the window already made for you. And for the root view controller, notice that we just have the view controller for today and not a UI navigation controller. So that's something there is. Over in our color.swift, we have our color class here, and this is just so we can make objects to define our data. And so the color here is the background color for each of the cells with like the rounded edges. The hex string here is what happens when you click on a cell. It'll display a label with that hex string, and then the selected Boolean just specifies if we've selected the cell or not, and that label should appear or not. So yeah, over in our view controller, we have our collection view, we have our data and some constants to help us render things. So first off are our data arrays here. So we're actually going to be grouping things in sections today. Last week for our table view, we only had one section, so everything could be defined within a 1D array. But because we want sections, I've defined things in a 2D array. That way we can group things by their section and then have our individual objects be the data for each cell within a section. And some to-dos here, some constraints commented out, more to-dos, and this is just some of the styling and constraint code for other files that we'll later make. And so yeah, that's all there is. Assets or whatever, there's nothing in here. So let's just get started by creating our collection view. And what that's going to look like is just collection view equals UI collection view. And we're going to want this one with the frame and collection view layout. And so for the frame, we can just do .0 because we'll set the constraints up later to specify its frame. But for collection view layout, we're actually going to have to make that up here. So our layout is going to be a collection view flow layout. And if we see here, there's a bunch of different options we can set. One of the big things is scroll direction. So scroll direction actually defaults to vertical, so it's not something we have to set here, but just to show for syntax, if you do want a horizontal scroll direction, it's there for you. But today we'll be doing a vertical collection view scrolling. But yeah, some other things are minimum inter-item spacing and minimum line spacing. And what you'll see here on our final app that we've made is that there's some spacing in between the cells of the same row horizontally, and then there's also some spacing in between cells of different rows vertically. And so minimum inter-item spacing is that spacing horizontally, and the line spacing is the spacing vertically. So let's just set that here. And for that, I'll just use our constant up here, cell padding. Do the same for minimum line spacing. All right, and then after that, because we're working with sections, I also want to give a section inset, and this is like completely optional, but I'll just specify a top and bottom inset to be section padding, and left and right can just be 0. Okay, so now that we have our layout, we can just pass that into our collection view here and do some things that we do with all other views, translate auto resizing mask into constraints, set that to false, and also add it to our subview so we can see it. And so now that we have that, I'll just uncomment our constraints for our collection view, and let's play this. All right, so this is what we have here. This black rectangle indicates where our collection view's frame is, and so that's how we want it right now because we haven't defined any collection view cells. So there's no content rendered, and also the background color will default to black. So let's actually set our background color to clear and get to the fun part where we create some collection view cells. And so for that, we're just going to do File, New File, Cocoa Touch class. And you can see here that there's like a bunch of options because there's a lot of UI elements to create. But for today, or for collection view cells, we're just going to subclass a collection view cell. I'm going to call it color collection view cell. All right, so that's what we have here. So first off, I'm just going to take our constraints and styling from here, and just paste it in. Yeah, so because we're trying to create our own subviews for our collection view cell, we're actually going to have to override the original init function. Let's call super.init first. And so, all right, and when this error pops up, just click on fix and it'll do that for you. But let's look at the final version again. So for here, we have our background square with the rounded corners and also a label that shows up and disappears. So for the round edged square, I'm just going to create a UI view for that. So let's do private for color view. Let's do UI view, and then for the label, we'll just make a UI label. So label. All right, so now that we have that, we can just give it some styling as usual, give it some constraints. And yeah, all right. I'm gonna call these constraints here, and then that's all we have for the collection view cell now. So now that we have that class created, we can register our collection view cell to our collection view. And what this does is that it lets our collection view know what kinds of views that it should be displaying inside it. So collection view.register, there's a bunch of options here, but our collection view cell needs to be specified through by a cell class. So we're going to choose the first option and then call color collection view cell.self. And for the reuse identifier, it's kind of similar to table views or table view cells where we're going to be dequeuing and reusing our cells. So for that, we'll just use our constant that's defined up here and pass that through. All right, so now that we've registered our cell to our collection view, we're going to have to specify what to actually render, specify the data that we want to pass into our cell, and also specify how many cells to create. So for that, we're going to conform our view controller to something called UICollectionViewDataSource. And so we can do that through an extension. Let's do that there. And if we wait a bit, we'll see that Swift gives us this error. This is just saying that we have these two required functions that we need to specify. And so the first one is number of items in section, and the other one being cell for item at. So notice here that both of them have this collection view input, and this is because you could potentially have multiple collection views within your view controller. And if you want to render different amounts of cells or different cells for them, you can differentiate them with this collection view input. But for today, we just have one collection view, so we're just going to jump right into dequeuing it like with our table view cells. So this is just going to be dequeue reusable cell with reuse identifier. We'll use the same one. And pass in our index path and cast it as color collection view cell. And so now that we have our cell, this DQ is just saying that we can reuse and recycle our cells whenever they go off screen from our collection view, and that way it's more efficient to be reusing. But yeah, we can configure, well firstly, we'll eventually have to return a cell, but we want to configure some data for the cell. That way it can display different colors and different labels for each of them. So I'll actually write a configure function within our color collection view cell. And so one thing to note is that this function can literally be named whatever you want, but I just like to call it configure, so that's what we're gonna do in this demo. And yeah, so for each of the colors, we want the color view's background color to be different, so we'll just set the background color to colors color. We also want the hex label text to be the colors hex, so we'll do that. And when we click and unclick, we'll see here that the background actually darkens a bit, and this is because I have the opacity change. And so what this looks like is just color view dot layer dot opacity equals to color dot selected. If it's selected, it'll be darker. So opacity ranges from 0 to 1. 1 is like 100%, and so if it's not selected, I'll just make it be a bit transparent. So that's the 0.8 here. But yeah, other than that, we have our hex label that shows and hides. So we'll just do hex label dot is hidden equals to not color dot selected. And so now that we have that, we can configure our cell by calling that. And the color we want will be in our colors array. Index path has two things. It has the section, and it can also have the item here. So let me just explain what this does. Yeah, so colors is a 2D array, and index path, essentially what we want is that each of these are a separate section. So we want to pass in the index path dot section to specify which group or like which array within the array, colors array, that we want to look at. And then index path dot item just lets us select the actual color object within that section. And yeah, so item is also synonymous to row for table views, but it is used for collection views, so that's what we have here. And then lastly, we have to specify the number of items in section. And so here we have our section passed in as an input, and this allows us to have different number of cells per section. And so for this, we'll just return colors at section dot count. And so yeah, let's look at what this does. All right, so first off, nothing is showing, and that's because we actually we've defined our data source methods here, but our collection view doesn't know that these functions are down here. And so what we have to do is actually set collection view's data source to self. And so what self specifies is our view controller that we're currently in. And so by saying self here, it's telling our collection view that the data source methods it wants are within our view controller. And so it's able to look at these functions here. And so let's run that again. All right, so now we have two cells. These two cells are our neutrals, which are in our first section. However, we're missing our other two sections. And so this is because UI collection views will default to one section, but we can override it by specifying its number of sections. And so for that, I'll just return sections.count, and that'll just tell our collection view that we want 3 sections for the neutrals, warm colors, and cool colors. So let's play that. All right, so now all our cells are rendering and we have all the colors for each section. Okay, so next up is making sure, or is changing the size of our cells. Collection views will automatically wrap our cells depending on their sizes. So here we'll see that the cells are a bit bigger, and that's why some will like wrap to the next row. And it's the same kind of logic with our current build, but we do want to make the cells a bit larger and fit 2 per row. So for that, we're actually going to have to extend a different thing called a UICollectionViewDataSource. And so what this looks like is if we just do that here, there will be something called size for item at. And so this will allow you to control the height and the width of your cells for a collection view cell. And so we see here that we want to eventually return a CG size with a width and a height. And since I want squares, I'll just make size a variable here and just set that there. So first off, we have our collection view width. The way we're going to do this is through math. We have our width, and then we have our 2 cells that we want in each row. So we're going to divide that by 2. But then we also have to account for the cell padding that's in between each of them. So that's just 1 cell padding per row. So we're going to actually subtract that from here. Yeah, so let's just, okay. So there will be another problem that shows up with this. Similar to how we had to set the data source to self, we actually have to set our collection views delegate to self as well. And again, that's just telling our collection view that its delegate methods are part of the view controller, and so that way it'll actually look at this size for item at function. And so if we run this, all right, we'll see that now everything is grouped within 2s. Okay, so now that we have that, I guess it's time to move on to creating a header view. And so for that, it's pretty similar, where we just do file, new file, Cocoa Touch class. And so for this, we're actually going to look for UI collection reusable view. And I'm going to call this a header view. All right, so similar to the collection view cells, I have some styling and constraints already made for you, just commented out, so I'll just move them there. And then we're going to also have to override the init. That way we can put a label on there. Okay. And then we'll just fix this again. And yeah, so first off, just that simple label we want, the UI label, so we'll just make it here. And then give it some styling. And also give it some constraints. And so now that we have that, we have to register it to our collection view, similar to our collection view cells. And what that's going to look like is if we go to register, note that it's not a collection view cell, so we can't be specifying a cell class. Instead, we'll be specifying a view class. And so this view class is going to be our header view. And what it is a header. So we're just going to look for UICollectionView.element kind section header, and the use identifier. We're going to use our constant up here. All right. So now that we've registered our header view, we'll have to specify its rendering and size, also similar to what we did for the cells. Yeah, so what this is okay, so we're going to look for this function view for supplementary element of kind. And so this allows us to render our supplementary elements like a header view. So yeah, let's just dequeue it similarly to our cell. And instead of a cell, it's a supplementary view. So we're going to dequeue this view of kind, same kind. So we're going to look for UICollectionView.element kind section header. Same reuse identifier. So let's look for header reuse identifier and then pass in our index path. And then finally cast it to header view. All right. And essentially we're going to return our header. Okay, so because each of the headers have a different text, we're actually going to make a configuring function for it as well. But I'll just call it subtitle. So let's do that. And just set the labels text to the title. And so here, we'll just have header.setTitle to our string inside sections. So sections at indexPath.section is what we want. And so now that we've specified the rendering for our header, we'll also have to specify the size for our header. And so what this looks like is we're going to look for our function reference size for header and section. And that will just also return a CG size, specifying our width and height. For the width, I'll just use collectionView.frame.width. So it's the same width as our collection view, but for the height, just give it whatever height you want. 48 is fine. But yeah, let's take a look at what this does. And yeah, so now we have our headers here. And so last step would be to make that click functionality for our cells. And so that's actually not part of our data source or our delegate flow layout. So we can extend it or create another extension for view controller, or we can also put a comma here and specify UI collection view delegate. And that's what this selection function is in. Similar to table views where there's a cell for row at, or did select item, or did select row at. All right, table views have did select row at. Well, collection views have something really similar called did select item at. And so when we click on an item, we'll want to change our color data array and change that color's selected Boolean. So what we're going to do here is just index into our colors array and change its selected Boolean here. And now that we've updated the data within our colors array, in order for our collection view to show the new cells with the new data, we'll have to reload it. So that's just collection view reload data. And yeah, let's take a look at that. All right, so now we can click on things and the labels will show up, and then we can click again and hide the labels. And so yeah, that's all we have for the demo today. Back to the slides. Last up, some action items. Project 5 will be due this upcoming Sunday, April 4th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time.